Okay, guys and gals, mostly gals, thanks for tuning in. I had quite a few of you guys reach out to me about what happened to the Will episode. It is back up. My internal monologue got the best of me for a moment, but I realized, and a lot of people were letting me know that there was information in there that really helped them out. So I fought against my internal monologue and I reposted it, so it's up. And it will be up for a bit until my internal monologue gets the best of me again. But a lot of people made some valid points, and they were saying that there were loads of information that they found beneficial, and they were grateful that I posted the episode and I talked about it and I was candid. It's hard for me to be candid in that way, and I do have to remind myself that sometimes things that we go through aren't about us. It's about helping other people. So I did take it down. It is back up, and it will be up until further notice or until my internal monologue gets the best of me and causes me to take it down again. So that's that. So that's not what we're going to talk about in this episode. We're going to build off of that, though, but we're going to sidestep things. I was having a conversation with my friend Roa. Shout out to Roa. She's listening. She probably is. About the Garden of Eden and the third dimension. I have been going on fasts, spiritual fasts, if you want to call it spiritual, for the last couple of months or so. And I realized that when on the days that I fast, 2 days ago specifically, you do feel a bit high. Fasting provides the same type, and you can Google this, okay? Like, you can verify this on DuckDuckGo. It's out there on the internet. If you fast, after a while, it gives you the same feeling of being high. You're just sort of calm and chill, and your internal monologue slows down, and there's a certain level of sharpness and mental acuity that comes with, fasting. And so 2 days ago specifically, I try to do fasting about 3 to 4 days a week, intermittent fasting. I don't do like a Ramadan sort of thing. It's mostly like intermittent fasting where I get up, work out, etc. I break my fast at 3. I eat a bunch until say like 8 o'clock, and then I fast again the entire day. But 2 days ago, I pushed it, and I went for a 24-hour fast, and it's not something I just woke up and did. By the way, you have to build up to it. So I've been doing intermittent fasting for a couple of years now. And I just now have been able to do a 24-hour fast. It was an exertion of will, and it was well timed with our conversations about exertion of will, right? And books on magic and things like that, and exercising well. And I've been meditating as well, and disconnecting. I don't just sit and meditate like in the morning or at night. I mean, I do that, but also throughout the day, I'm very mindful of monitoring my thoughts and understanding that the voice in your head, that internal monologue, its purpose is to push forth a particular narrative, right? The predominant narrative, the prevailing narrative of your avatar. It whispers, and then it kind of lulls your consciousness to sleep and leads you on a path, right? The pre-programmed, most highly probable path. And if you listen to it, you find yourself sort of acting out or living, and some would argue, Friedrich Nietzsche would argue, reliving, right? Or Nietzsche's eternal return, the same life over and over again. But if you want to have a different life, if you want to spiral out of the cycle, as Uspensky and Gurdjieff put it, right? P.D. Uspensky and Gurdjieff, two philosophers, as they put it, you have to stay awake, you have to stay conscious, and you have to continuously throughout your day disconnect from that internal monologue. Because if you listen to it, you basically become unconscious and you end up just acting out the same patterns over and over again, because that voice is a program. The voice, your internal monologue, is your program. The way I've explained it in past episode is I called it essentially this Siri. So imagine you upload your consciousness into your phone, okay, for whatever reason. Or let's fast forward 50 years, and now we have, instead of iPhones, we have iRobots, right? And your iRobot, like that one movie with Bruce Willis, I forget what it was called, but they basically lived through their like sort of robotic versions of themselves. So imagine 50 years from now, you have an iRobot and you have attached or projected your consciousness into, or uploaded your consciousness into this robot, and you sit in the safety of your home, and then this robot is like a representative of you. But in that iRobot, there's a Siri, and that Siri is essentially your iRobot's internal monologue. What I'm saying is that's exactly what's happening to our bodies right now. If you're saying that we're in a simulation, right, then you have to kind of take that and run with it. You don't just say, okay, we're in a simulation and then leave it. What are the implications of that? If we are in a simulation and this is a false construct, and your brain is a quantum computer and your body is a machine as defined by every doctor and every, book on, biology that's out there, then you have to understand that there is an operator and an operating system. And as we all know, each operating system has its own sort of intelligence, right? So your phone has its intelligence, a programmed operating intelligence. So you've got the Siri, you've got the Alexa and things like that. And your internal monologue is your body's intelligence, right? Which is distinct from and different from your consciousness. But we live in a society, more on this in a while, but we live in a society that programs you to identify, and not even just a society. We live in a reality, in a virtual reality, in a simulation, whatever word you want to use to define it, a dream, whatever word you want to use to define what this reality is. We live in a construct that has programmed you to identify with an internal monologue. But the fact of the matter is, right, there's a phrase, it's a prevailing ideology. It says, I think, therefore I am, right? But then the consciousness that says, I am, is different from the consciousness that thinks, right? So the consciousness, the entity that sits and listens to the internal monologue, that is who you are. You are not the voice in your head. You are the listener. You are not the voice in your head. You are the listener. Okay, so once you start to sit with that, understand that once again, you cannot listen to an internal monologue. You cannot listen to that voice in your head while simultaneously listening to an audiobook, a podcast, right? So you are listening, right? So it requires you to shift your focus, your attention from the internal monologue to a book that you're listening to. If that was really you, if that voice in your head really was you, why would you have to listen to it? You would just know what to do. You would just know what the prompts are. You would just know. You don't even need that. You would not need that, right? If that's really you, you don't need a voice in your head telling you what steps you need to take. So I'm saying that internal monologue is the intelligence of your body machine, your avatar, your physical form, of which you are the consciousness that listens to it, right? And it's also that same voice that is unfortunately responsible for a certain amount of suffering. And I talked about this a bit in the previous episode, Will. And it's back up, like I said. So go check it out, I guess, or don't. Whatever. There's part of my brain that's like, watch that episode be the one that actually like does super well. The one that I'm like, I don't want a lot of people listening to it. But it is there. So bear all of that in mind, right? You must understand that everything that you've been programmed with, every idea you've been programmed with in this reality is set up to keep you in a particular frame of thought, to keep you in a particular mindset. And so if you say we're in a simulation, then you need to understand that every simulation has a set of programs, right? That you are conditioned to follow. And it's the purpose of listening to podcasts like this, or listening to books with these same sort of ideas, anywhere from books on magic, right, which we've been discussing over the last couple of weeks, to books on, meditation, books on, breaking the habit of being yourself, books on stoicism, all of these sort of books, right? Books on psychology, self-help, all of these books are set up for you to essentially deprogram your avatar, the mind of your avatar, in a way, hack your mind. But none of these things work if you don't first hold on to the idea that internal monologue, which is the root cause of all of our suffering. It absolutely is. It really is. When you sit and you realize how much it's just going on, right? So you could be sitting in paradise. You can be sitting in paradise in complete silence, watching the waves, crest, and crash into the shores, and have like all your favorite foods and everything like that. And in the midst of paradise, here comes this voice to corrupt your experience, right? And it's never anything positive. It starts to complain. And then you sit there and listen. And what did I say? You cannot listen to the internal monologue and listen to something else, right? So if the fact of the matter is, if you have to sit and listen to it, it's something that is not of you. You're not the voice that thinks. You are, and I would go even as far as to say that we don't really think. We sit and listen to this internal monologue go off, and that's what we call thinking, right? For the most part, it's unconscious thinking. This voice talks to us. We cannot control our thoughts. If you can control your thoughts, then tell me what you're going to think next, right? So you cannot control your thoughts, because it would require you to think them before you think them. So these thoughts just sort of come into our minds, and no one in our society, or very few people, have told us just because you have this thought doesn't mean you have to listen to it, right? And it sounds weird because on one end, we are told that people who listen to voices in their heads are mad, right? They're crazy. That's the word that the label they like to use in condemnation of other people. But the majority of us are listening to this voice in our head. The majority of us, and there's a lot of people, I should say, that are so identified with that internal monologue, with that voice in their head, that they don't even hear the voice. The voice just consumes them, and then they just find themselves just straight up listening to it and reacting. There's no space between their psyche, their consciousness, and that internal monologue. They're deeply asleep. And that voice, that Siri, that OS, whatever you want to call it, the intelligence of your body, the program of your avatar, it is sneaky because it catches you off guard, and it takes time, energy, effort, time being the most important thing, and a constant exertion of your will to continuously detach from it, to avoid landing on a path where your suffering is increased, or I should say, to avoid re-walking on the same path, acting out the same path, reliving the same life over and over and over again. Even if you don't believe in reincarnation, even if you have never read books by Anthony Peake, Life After Life, or Cheating the Ferryman or the Daemon, things like that. If you never read, Life After Life is by Raymond Moody, not Anthony Peake, but that's one book to check out. If you never read, these sort of books that deal with, people remembering their past lives, same souls, many bodies, right? That's another book by Brian. I can't remember his last name, but if you never actually taken the time to check these books out, you basically think that, okay, that's it. You're born and you die and that's it. If that's the case, I doubt you'd be listening to this. But if this is you, and that's okay. If that is you, that you believe that's okay. But understand that even within this life that you think you're living over, that you only live once, you still repeat the same patterns over and over again. You do, right? We tend to catch ourselves in the same situation. If you're too close to yourself to see that you're repeating the same cycles, look at your friends. They're calling you about the same stuff. There's your family members, they call you to complain about the same thing. They make the same decisions. They date the same people. They do the same things over and over and over again. Their life, just their one life, just their current incarnation is a loop. You think it stops? Right? Consciousness, you are a conscious entity existing in a physical form, right? So you cannot stop being, right? A conscious entity cannot stop being conscious. A human being can never stop being, simply because the form disintegrates and falls apart. It's just a vehicle, which I'm actually happy I did repost the will episode, because I illustrated this idea very well in the previous episode on will. It's just a car. It's just a vehicle of which you are the driver. Actually, the episode that I posted, it's like a short that I posted on my TikTok channel. I talked about this as well, right? So you are the driver of your vehicle, right? So if you're driving your car and God forbid, or the gods forbid, or fate forbid, whatever you believe in, your car gets into an accident and it's totaled, you're still okay, right? I prefer using a car analogy. If you drop your phone, provided that your information, your data in your phone has been backed up to servers, right? The data doesn't disintegrate, right? Because it's backed up to servers. Something would have to happen to the servers in order for your phone to essentially, or the data contained within your phone to be destroyed. And even if something happens to the server, the information is still the information, because at the end of the day, we are in a simulation Information cannot be created or destroyed, only modified. So all the information all that you have, right? So now we're pulling back. It's a scaling thing, right? So now everything that's contained within our virtual reality simulation that we call Earth, this world, our universe, the third dimension, whatever you want to call it, this information has been modified in different forms. With that information, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything repeats. Everything is a cycle. The seasons are a cycle. Everything is a circle. There is no beginning. There is no end. It goes on. I always say this. I said, and good news is you're immortal. The bad news is you're going to live forever. And I think that's why there are mechanisms in place for us to forget, because there's nothing more daunting than the idea of eternal life. It's exhausting, right? So I think that's a mechanism. The fact that we forget our past lives, the fact that we forget for the most part that we have lived these lives before, I think it's a built-in intentional mechanism to sort of help with the process of essentially being immortal beings, our consciousness being eternal forms. If this is a lot, I just stay with me. I do tend to simplify things, but if you repeat the same information over and over and over again, if you re-listen to the same episode over and over again, the more times you listen, the more familiar your brain becomes with the information, and then the easier it is for your brain to absorb the information. I promise you, it's not as complex as it initially sounds. So you just have to take the information that I'm giving to you right now and just trust in your heart that you do already understand it, because you've heard it before, right? And you're just remembering. And so every time you listen, you'll remember what you've heard, and it'll become familiar with these ideas, and then it becomes more and more easier to accept. Okay? And I'm certainly not saying that everything I'm saying that I ever say on this podcast is 100% right. The idea of this podcast isn't for me to give you guys information with the mindset that everything I'm saying is 100% right. That's not the idea here. The idea here is to inspire free thought, is to break the shackles of confinement that our brains have been held in, right? So the older you get, the more we start to realize that everything we've been told about this reality is a lie. So now the freedom there, I had a friend who said, that is a daunting thought to them, right? To realize that they've been lied to their entire life. And my response to that is actually, it's quite liberating, because then if everything I've been taught is bullshit, then that means I can create my own bullshit, right? I can create my own philosophy. I can create my own view on this world. And so that is what the purpose of this podcast is to inspire you with so many ideas so that you open your mind to think about what you want this world to be. So now, with that said, we're going to jump in. I was having a conversation with my friend Roa, and we were talking about the fourth dimension. So back to what I was saying about fasting. 2 days ago, I did pretty close to a 24-hour fast. And during the day, as I was driving and I was listening to a new book on magic, and the book is titled, in case you guys want to keep up, give me 1 second. It is in my voice stream app. I really should write this stuff out before I do that. It doesn't matter. And he was going to disconnect. Anyway, the book was called The Universal Master Key by Franz Bardon. That's what I was listening to. And in the midst of my fasting, I was sitting in my car, and all of a sudden it hit me. Shit. Because he was talking about the unseen world. All right. And he was saying that the unseen world is, there. It's always there, right? Just because we can't see it doesn't mean that it's not there. And all of a sudden I got blindsided by this idea about sleep and death. Sleep and death, sleep and death. We have this saying where people say, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And my brain in that moment inverted it and said, I'll die when I sleep. I'll die when I sleep. And it hit me, and I was like, oh shit. See, most of us, when we live our lives, we think we just have to get through our daily lives, and then when we die, depending on your belief system, but when we die, then we get to move on to, let's say it's the fourth dimension, or the next world, or heaven, or the afterworld, or Elysian fields, or whatever it is, you believe in, right? But my brain goes, what makes you think you have to wait till death to go to the fourth dimension? What makes you think? What makes you believe? Well, that's what I've been programmed with, right? But if somebody didn't put that idea in your head, what would you believe? Take that idea, throw it aside. Think about it right now. In every simulation, let's say you're playing a video game. Who sits 24 hours and just plays straight through? Nobody, right? You have to take breaks. So let's say I will live 75 years, right? If I went with conventional thinking, then that means that from birth to the age 75, I never exit. I never take a break. Yes, my body, that's what we're told. We're told when we sleep that our bodies are recharging, but I call bullshit. Your body does not need 8 hours to recharge. Something else is going on. And if somebody just like me, if some other human being just like me, just some other person just like me, didn't come up with that idea that that's it, that you live the 84 years or 70 years or whatever it is, and then when you're done, then you get to move on to the next place. If somebody didn't put that idea in my head, what conclusion would I have come to? Without that limiting thought, what conclusion about this reality would I have come to? The conclusion I would have come to is clearly, when you sleep, you leave. I'll say that again. Clearly, when you sleep, you exit the matrix. Because I'd always in my head, like, why the fuck do we need to sleep for 8 hours? That feels like a really long fucking time. Considering the fact that we only sleep for or we only dream for the last 20 minutes of our sleep cycle, right? It's like the REM order right before you wake up. That's when we dream. And that's when you sleep your deepest. Why do I need to be out for 7 fucking hours? And why is it that we cannot go more than a few days without sleeping? Otherwise you literally die, right? So whoever created the human body in the simulation, they're clearly super advanced. They're definitely more advanced than we are, because there's a lot of things that we cannot replicate that they have created with this reality. But we have cell phones. It doesn't take you 8 fucking hours to charge your cell phone. That's completely inefficient unless something else is going on. And I legit think that was the thought that hit me as I was driving, that I think that when you're sleeping for those 8 hours, you are in fact exiting the matrix. You are in fact exiting the matrix. You are in fact entering into the 4th dimension. And then the conversation, I mentioned this to my friend Roa, and then we had this beautiful conversation. And it started out with a conversation about the yin and yang, right? Contained within the yin is a yang, and contained within the yang is a yin, right? I had put out a video on the Mirrorverse. You can find it on my YouTube channel. It should be on my TikTok as well. But I talked about being entangled with a twin world, a Mirrorverse, right? So I've always been, I think because I was supposed to be a twin, I've always been fascinated with the idea of duality with twins. I had somebody actually comment that they were like, the way you have this gift you have of being able to see both sides, they attributed it to me perhaps being an air sign rather, but I have no air. I'm an earth sign, but I'm mostly fire, if you are into that kind of stuff. I'm just recently learning about it, but I'm mostly fiery and earth. But I just love looking at the nuances of things. And I've always been fascinated by doubles. I've always been fascinated by, you heard me talk about twin flames. And if you look at some of my posts on my my joliartist Instagram page, just scroll all the way down, you see a lot of my posts I wrote about the devil and God being the same place, the same person, right? The duality. It's always been something that my mind immediately gravitates towards. And I thought, as above, so below, as above, so below, as below, so above. And I'm thinking I thought about what if, of the myriad. I did this video. I think the video is called Unsafe to the Mirrorverse, and you can find it on the YouTube channel. But I did this video and I said, the myriad of, multiverses, universes across the multiverse, rather. What if there was one universe that we are sort of enmeshed with, like our twin universe, right? But I kept it as a universe. I did not approach it as a dimension, as different dimensions. And as Ro and I began to talk, we started incorporating the ideas of the fall of man and the apple. And so I'm going to read my notes to you, and then we're going to start breaking that apart. So these are what I wrote out as we were talking. I said dystopia, utopia, dynamic. So 2 days ago, I posted on my YouTube channel one of my older videos about the fact that if you look back in history, we have always lived in a dystopia. We have always lived in a dystopia. This world, this dimension is a dystopia. It is. Just look around. It is. I mean, not to say that you cannot find peace and joy and love and happiness in a dystopia, but it's giving dystopia, right? It's giving sci-fi, slight horror, especially if you look at like everything that's been going on the last like ever. But let's just say even just this past week alone, like just what happened with the kids in Texas and, the shooting in Buffalo. And I didn't want to talk about it because I know so many other people were talking about it, and I didn't want to bring you guys any lower than all of this news has been bringing people down. But I'm aware. Just because I don't always talk about it doesn't mean I'm not aware. Yeah. But this is a dystopia. But I also remembered one of my episodes. It's on the podcast, and the episode was called "What If Earth Was Another World's Heaven?" And if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, please do. And I talk about if you lived in a utopia, right? If you lived in a perfect world where you got everything you ever wanted instantaneously, that would get old. And eventually you would create a world like this, or you would want a world like this, or you would need a world like this in order to balance the sweetness of that. But I never thought of us as being, I never thought of our consciousness as being an intra-connected entity, a shadow and a light being, a dual being, and putting that together. But that resonates with me. That vibrates with me. It unlocks a part of my brain that literally, like I've turned on a bit. I'm not gonna lie. Like it does it to my brain. I'm really loving it because the idea that that we are in fact connected with the fourth dimension, which would explain why we see UFOs and UAPs and things like that, because they can come here and vice versa. Right? If they can come here and we can go there, maybe not with our bodies, but certainly with our non-corporeal forms. You have people talking about the CIA with experiments with Robert Monroe and things like that. And once again, we're not thinking deeply. If you have an astral body that allows you to connect to parallel universes and to interact with non-corporeal entities, right? That should tell you that you are not the body. So it reinforces everything I said at the beginning of this episode, that you're not the body. So then that's the case. And what you truly are is an intra-dimensional being. An intra-dimensional being. You are capable of occupying various forms. Right? The books that I've been reading on magic, they talk about how you can transfer your consciousness, right, into different parts of your bodies, and then inevitably, with enough practice, you should be able to then transfer your consciousness into other forms. And the guy talked about how witches and stuff use that to transfer their consciousness into their familiars, and then warg, right, to use a World of Warcraft, Game of Thrones terminology, warging. Right, but then the Native Americans, they also have they also have that same sort of mythos about entities that take on the forms of animals, things like that. So these sort of ideas keep sort of recurring. So they're all tapping into something, right? So what are they tapping into? Is this something that is possible? Is this something that is probable, right? Now, if you can shift your consciousness into various forms, if you can take your consciousness out of your body, a brilliant entertainment TV show on this is Behind Her Eyes. Rawa and I watched it yesterday. Again, it's like the second time I watched it. Starts off super fucking slow, but is worth watching it all the way to the end. Heebie-jeebies, but like really good, really well done on Netflix. But if there are people, maybe you cannot, but even if you have had even just one lucid dream your entire life. But what is a lucid dream? You are awake in another dimension. That means you've left your body and now you're awake. You can feel things, you can taste things, you can interact with things, you can have sex with people in these other dimensions, right? So that is happening right now. So that should tell you on some level that your consciousness is not fixed to this form. Your consciousness is not fixed to this form. Your consciousness is not fixed to this form. It just temporarily inhabits this reality every single day. You die every night. I gotta write this down because I want to make sure that I title this "You Die Every Night," because I think that's what's going on. Yeah. Like you really have to boom, break the shackles of a particular perspective on the nature of reality, on the nature of yourself, on the nature of consciousness, on the nature of what this world is. So then if that's the case, like remember I mentioned a couple episodes ago, I talked about time dilation effects that occur when you dream, right? You can close your eyes for a second and dream 15 minutes. Well, listen, if you close your eyes for 8 hours, maybe the 8 hours or the 6 hours or even the 5 hours that you're asleep in this reality, you are alive in another one for 24 or 12 or 18, living in another world, your consciousness, and you're toggling between dimensions. I would bet money that is actually what's happening. And because of the nature of this world, the nature of this reality, when you come back in with the whispering of your internal monologue, with the food, I'm going to come back to the food. I think there's a correlation between fasting, deprivation of food, right? Eating of the fruit, right? Let's think about what happened to Adam and Eve. Let's, once again, I'm not a religious person, but I enjoy mythology and I take information from where the information is, and where I find it. But Adam and Eve, remember what I said, you can find yourself in paradise and then the internal monologue starts to talk and completely corrupts it, right? So here's what we were talking about. I said Adam and Eve were in paradise. They didn't realize anything was wrong until they ate the fruit, right? Now, the conclusion that Ro and I came to is that the fruit of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, and I think it was a tree of knowledge that they ate from, and then the tree of life was taken away. I think, or we concluded that, and we had this conversation not high. it's just we were vibing, which I love vibing with people like this who like just have open minds and they we go back and forth and we bounce ideas off of each other. But I think, right, that the Garden of Eden was in the fourth dimension, and the trees of life and the trees of knowledge were from the third dimension. They were from this world, and they were actual apples. And for whatever reason, the creator of this world took with them, creators of this world, Elohim, took with them a token of their creation, of this simulation, and planted it in the fourth dimension. And when they said, don't eat from these trees, because they knew that by eating from the trees, it would corrupt their four-dimensional beings and make them into three-dimensional form, right? Or corrupt their minds the way that internal monologue corrupts our peace, corrupts our minds. And when they ate from the fruit, what happened? They started hearing the internal monologue, right? The internal monologue said, you're naked, you should cover yourself, you should feel shame, right? Isn't that what we deal with? That's what we deal with, right? What will this person think of you? That's that voice, that's the internal monologue. And I think it comes from the food, and I think that there's a correlation. When you fast, you notice that internal monologue doesn't have as much strength. And this is not just me saying this. This is an actual spiritual practice. There is a book, I think Food of the Gods talks about this. Another one, Immortality Key by Brian Moreski. I've mentioned this a few times. They talk about this, about how priests, like ancient priests and priestesses, would fast. And they would also take in hallucinogens, which as above, so below. As above, so below. If in the fourth dimension, now we're just open mind, guys. We're just sharing ideas. It doesn't have to be anything concrete. I'm not saying you have to believe it. I'm telling you a story. I'm spinning for you a narrative for you to listen and to chew on and to masticate on. So if there are fruits in the fourth dimension, if the story of Genesis and Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden took place in the fourth dimension, and the fruits, the apples, were from the third dimension, they were legit apples. And what makes you think that there wouldn't also be fruits from the fourth dimension here on earth? The ayahuasca, the mushrooms, the peyotes, etc., etc. Right? As above, so below. As below, so above. It's something to think about. So what I wrote was, there's a dystopia-utopia dynamic between the third and the fourth dimension. I think the fourth dimension is utopia, and we go there every night. And then we spend our 8 hours there, and we refresh, we recharge, and then we come back here. And we do our time, and we sort of go through it with the pain and the anguish and the and the angst, but also the food, right? But the food sort of kind of traps us here a bit, and it causes us to forget. There was a book called, the short stories called The Naming of Names. Look it up. I remember watching or reading it in, I think, grade school. And from what I can remember, now I'm paraphrasing here, it's been a while, but it just popped into my head. It's been a while since I read it. But what I remember, I think it was a Ray Bradbury story, but I could 100% be wrong. But there were Earthlings that went to another planet. And they, no, they weren't Earthlings. They were spacemen, and they went to another planet to explore. And they started eating from the planet, fruit from the planet, and then they started to forget where they were from, and they essentially went native, and then they started renaming different aspects, and it turns out they were on Earth. Now, I probably should have read that. I'm going to read it after this episode. I probably should have read it before I recorded this, but this is like a Cliff Notes version of what I remember the story is about. But the story is called The Naming of Names. So the idea has been explored, not quite on this level, and not quite this on this, like with this dynamics or whatever, like basically me saying that you are in fact a fourth dimensional entity that exists in both dimensions, right? On daytime, during the day, you live in the fourth dimension, in the third dimension, and at night, you live in the fourth dimension. So at day, you come and you live in the third dimension, and then at night, you go to the fourth dimension. Once again, recurring narratives. What was it? The story of Psyche, and is it Psyche or Persephone? Sorry, the story of Persephone in the underworld. Right? She ate of the fruit. She ate a pomegranate, I believe, and by eating the fruit, she trapped herself in the underground. Guys, this is good shit. I'm sorry, like, there's nobody else talking about this stuff. Like, this is good stuff, right? She trapped herself in the underground. Google it. The story of Persephone in Hades. She ate of a fruit, and she trapped herself in underground for 6 months out of the year. So half time there, half time above the earth. And it's the same sort of recurring narratives, the same recurring themes. The foods that we eat trap us here and make us more unconscious. Then by fasting, it should make us more conscious. And by eating certain fruits from the fourth dimensions that have found the way to this dimension could also make us more conscious. Every time we go to sleep, this is reading from my notes again, every time we go to sleep, our sun, quote, light, or sun/light, rather, rises, right? So if you're a light being, when you lay your body down, your light, your consciousness rises, and we ascend to the fourth dimension. When you lay your body, you leave your body. And every time we wake up, we descend to the third dimension. And so every time we come into this world, you think about it as night, right? Because you see the same, what did I say at the beginning of this? Everything is a cycle, right? The moon waxes and wanes, right? You have the full moon, and then you have the dark, the I forget what it's called. The not full moon, the dark moon, whatever. It's the same sort of repeating cycle. Why do we think we don't cycle? Not only do we live the same life, not only do we reincarnate the entire existence, well, I think every time you go to sleep, it's a cycle. Your soul rises to the fourth dimension, and then you live your life there, and then you at dawn you come back in here, right? And that's why I think when you're woken abruptly, it's like a sucking thing, because your consciousness is being pulled down into the third dimension. If your consciousness was actually in your body as you slept, you wouldn't have that dramatic effect, right? It would just be you open your eyes, right? Like every time you unplug your fucking charger, your phone doesn't lose its shit, right? Because it's just you're unplugging it. I mean, it might vibrate or whatever, but it doesn't, depending on your settings that you have, but it's not a dramatic thing. But if you're woken up abruptly, I think there's a tether there while you are serving your purpose or existing, connected to your life, living out your lifespan. I think that when you are in the other world, you are aware that on some level of this world, and then in the fourth dimension, right? And then when you are in this dimension, you're aware on some level of the other dimension, right? You have your higher self that kind of guides you. Well, what if your higher self is literally your higher self? Right? People are told your higher self is your future self, but what if it's just you, but not from the future? It's just your fourth dimensional self outside of form, guiding your paths as you walk through the third dimension, and then you just literally die every night. You die every night. Now, one with a third eye. So you've got your left eye, you got the right eye, right? Your left is sinister, right? Sees darkness, right? Your left is sinister. Your left is sinister. It's got Latin roots. It means darkness, right? So you have your left eye. Then you have your right eye, and your right is light, right? And now you have the third eye, which is in the middle. And what does the third eye do? Well, one with the third eye open is able to see between both worlds, to retain information from both worlds, to connect with both worlds. I think that's what it is. They have us fearing the third eye, right? But once again, what did I say? Everything you're told, we've been taught to fear. It's like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Well, I want you to go pay attention to the man. Face your fucking fears and look at that shit, right? I talked about this in the last episode. So what if the reason why we feel connected to the other world or feel high when we fast is because something about the consumption of food on this planet grounds us here, right? Lowers our vibration, right? Puts our fourth dimensional soul, right? It feeds the Siri, it feeds that internal monologue, and it makes it strong. But by weakening the body in a way through fasting, right, it strengthens your astral being. I'm not encouraging you to fast. I'm just telling you what I do. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional. I got to give the whole thing. Like, if this is something you want to do, please consult with a medically trained professional, et cetera, right? But so the less we eat, the more conscious we are, because the consumption of said food from this world grounds us here. So why would fasting be considered a spiritual practice? If you Google it, go on DuckDuckGo, go on Google and type in fasting as a spiritual practice. Tons of information on there. So why would it be considered a spiritual practice? Unless, of course, it disconnects you by not consuming, by not putting into your soul, by not putting into your temple, right? Too many things from this world. You sort of lighten yourself, and you essentially allow for your higher self to kind of come through, and the information from your higher self to come through. I'm on a 24-hour fast right now at this moment. I'm about to break my fast after I finish this episode. It was hard 2 days ago, not so hard now. And it's interesting because the more I fast, the less I want to eat like fried food, bad food, things like that. I just want to eat sort of more fruit, right? Living sort of fruit. I wonder what that's about. I put in quotes or in paragraphs, eat the fruit and fall. So that's what we kept saying to each other yesterday. Eat the fruit and fall. Eat the fruit and fall. Somebody had commented on the TikTok channel that in their religion, I believe they're Mormons, they said that they believed that Adam and Eve were supposed to. It was their duty. They had to eat the fruit to fall. And I thought that was interesting. Once again, I'm not a Mormon, but I take the information and we weave whatever theory, because many paths, they're all contain different pieces of the puzzle for us to start to put together what this thing is, right? So if we were intended to fall, maybe that is because that is what we are, right? Think again about the yin and the yang, right? So the yin is darkness with a bit of light, and that's what this world is. Right? And then the fourth dimension, that's what I'm going to call it now, heaven, whatever you want to call it. The fourth dimension is light, which is a bit of darkness. And they cycle together and makes a perfect circle, and it swirls over and over again. Right? What other narratives do we have, these sort of recurring themes? Well, we have Adam and Eve. They ate the apple and they fell. You have Snow White. She eats the apple and she sleeps. Right? What do we keep saying? People wake up. Become conscious, become aware, become sentient, become awake, right? I said to my husband, I think that people are born conscious, and then this world puts them to sleep. I'll say that again. You're born conscious. I think babies, you look at them, they've got their eyes wide open, they're looking at everything, but their forms, they can't speak. But sometimes you see them looking, right? Or smiling at something, but they can't speak. And then I think as we continue to come down here over and over again, you slowly disconnect, right, from the fourth dimension. But I do think still, even when you sleep, I just think that the bond of remembering that you're going there, coming back, just becomes weaker and weaker. Not to say that you don't go. I'm just saying that the bond becomes weaker and weaker. I think that's legit. I think what might be going on here. Right? Back to the Matrix. In the Matrix, right? You take the pill to wake up, right? I talked about this, I think late last year, about the Oracle. She gave Morpheus cookies, and that changed him, right? It woke him up a bit more, made him more of an active character, right? So yeah, what if that's what's going on? What if we literally die when we sleep? I mean, if you define death, of course, as your consciousness leaving the body. What if sleep is the gateway to the unseen world, to the unseen, invisible world, and you don't have to wait till the end of your life to go? You just have to take a fucking nap. Imagine every night we go to another world, another dimension, for consciousness to rest and recuperate, right? And we come here, do our work, right? This might actually start to feed into this whole idea of loosh, right? Remember last episode I talked about that in the writings of Robert Monroe, he talked about how there are fourth dimensional entities that feed off our energy, right? And then I thought about Rick and Morty in the episode The Ricks Must Be Crazy, where it was like he created a world. He created a small dimension in order to provide energy to power his car, as a battery for his car. And then in that world, in his battery, there was another world. A scientist created a smaller world to provide batteries for them so that they can provide batteries for Rick. And it just went all the way down. And I was thinking, like, maybe that's what we do. We come here and we struggle and work. And so our experiences are energetic releases, and you can choose to opt out, I think, if you just choose to not suffer. Obviously, like I said, we're just throwing out ideas, right? But you can choose, I think, to opt out and not to suffer, right? But the energetic releases is how we work to provide energy for the fourth dimension. And then what we're seeing of these entities, it's siphon off that energy, right? The negative energy, or even the positive energy. But it's still all us doing it to ourselves, right? Because at the end of the day, you watch Scooby-Doo, the monsters are always human. Not to say that they're monsters. I'm just saying that, we are our own antagonists, right? So maybe this is our work. We come here, we do our work, right? And when we go to sleep, we check out. We log off, go to another dimension, go to Eden, hang out naked with that person you're crushing on, right? And then come back, hang out naked with your partner, right? That's the real world. This is the shadow world. Say that again. What if that's the real world? The light world. And this is the shadow world. But it doesn't mean you're a shadow person. It just means that you are inhabiting a lower dimensional shadow form. I saw a video. I'll leave you guys with this. Somebody said, your shadow is a two-dimensional form. It's still you. You cast a shadow. It's attached to you. It's a two-dimensional form. It's flat. It's not 3D. So what if you're the shadow of a fourth dimensional being? And he left it at that. And I'm taking a step further. And I'm saying, a fourth dimensional being, your shadow is still you. You're more formed in the fourth dimension. It's still you, right? And I'm saying a fourth dimensional form, a fourth dimensional entity, an intradimensional entity would be unbound to space, time, and form, and would be capable, right, of occupying all forms, from energetic ball, which is one dimension, to, a shadow form, right, which is what we call waifs and ghosts and things like that, right, to a three-dimensional form, which is your body, to a fourth dimensional form, which would be an unbound entity. And I'm saying all of those things are you. Thanks for listening.